Welcome to Dead Souls Social Club.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
If you enjoy our show and you find our research interesting, please leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Something that small really does go a long way in helping us out. You can find more about us and the research that we do by heading over to Instagram and searching our name. As always, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good evening, everyone. Much like the previous episodes, and due to how much we have to cover, we're going to jump straight back in tonight. As I advised in the previous 2 episodes, it's beneficial to you, the listener, if you listen to this series in episode order to ensure that you can easily understand what is being discussed and not miss out on any crucial details. So once again, here we go. This is The Case of the West Memphis 3, Part 3. Let's start with the February incident report. On the afternoon of February the 4th, 1994, Jesse Miskelly was being transported to the Arkansas Department of Corrections in Pine Bluff. This was the day before Jesse Miskelly's sentencing following his trial. During the transportation, it was mentioned to Jesse by Deputy James Lindsay, who was the transportation officer that day, that he could talk freely, as anything he said could not be used against him in a court of law. Jesse, it turns out, did choose to talk. The things said by Jesse would become known as the February incident report. This report mostly repeated details from Jesse's other confessions, like his involvement with a cult that killed dogs, the boys being raped, and how he met up with Jason and Damien. But some interesting points of deviation are to follow. Jesse said that he did not mention the ears to the police, only a headlock. The boys' autopsy revealed injuries to their ears resembling small bites and tears. Jesse also mentioned that sticks had been used to beat the boys. Now, the boys' autopsy did reveal head injuries consistent with being struck with a blunt object. Jesse was asked how the boys were kept under control. He said, quote, "They were like puppies. When you whoop a puppy and tell it to stay, it will," unquote. Jesse did say he had to catch Michael Moore, who had run off, but he did not say at what point this was. At one point, Jesse said that Jason had a buck-type looking knife and that Jason, quote, "cut it all off and threw it in the weeds," unquote. This was in reference to Christopher Byers' penis. This is the first time that Jesse mentioned his knife or of Jason throwing what he had removed. Jesse said he lied about the time and the rope to trick the police and to see if they were lying. Those were his words. Jesse claimed he felt sorry for what had happened and talks as if he wants to testify against the other boys so that they will not go free and to help himself. The confession to lawyers on February the 8th, 1994. Dan Stidham, of Jesse Miskelly's lawyers, conducted a documented and recorded interview with Jesse on Tuesday, February the 8th, 1994, 3 days after Jesse's conviction for first and second degree murder. The interview took place at the Pine Bluff Correctional Diagnostic Unit in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I'm going to discuss the conversation, so as before, please use the following link to read the entire transcript of the interview, which will help in your understanding of what I'm about to discuss. The transcript link is www.callahan.mysite.com/WM3/JM_2_8_statement.html. I apologize that some of these links aren't very user-friendly or concise. They aren't my links, and they're quite aged, so they will be older style links. Please don't let that deter you from following them to get some fantastic resource, however. Now, this confession was post-conviction, as I stated. Jesse had admitted that he lied for 7 months before recanting large parts of his story. Now, the account consisted of Jesse hanging around Highland Trailer Park and getting an Evan Williams whiskey bottle from Vicky Hutchison that he later smashed near an overpass on the way home. Jesse then met up with Damien and Jason at Lakeshore Trailer Park where Jason lived, and being shown the picture of the 3 victims in a briefcase. Then, he says, they walked to the murder site, began drinking alcohol, and attacked the 3 boys who they stumbled upon in the woods. Jesse cut out most of the graphic claims and details of rapes and assaults in this story, but he did also admit to more involvement in the murders, like hitting the boys. Jesse then left the scene and got back to Highland at roughly 7:30 p.m. and went to the wrestling event shortly after, which is the first time he mentions going to the wrestling event in all of his confessions. He said that he got scared of swearing on the Bible and lying, and that's why he decided to confess again. He also told his defense lawyer that he wanted to testify against Damien and Jason. Problems with this confession. Firstly, what Jesse did beforehand. Jesse's claims to have approached a police car and his defense witnesses at approximately 5:30 p.m, despite the recorded disturbance call being at 6:30 p.m. Jesse then contradicts Vicky Hutchison's testimony when he says at 6 p.m. that she got alcohol for him. She said in a May 1993 interview that she was in West Memphis from 5 to 8 p.m. getting groceries and something to eat. From what I can see and have read, I found no public record of her changing this story. So here's a timeline. Jesse alleges that he got to Lakeshore Trailer Park at 6:30 p.m. and that he subsequently left the murder scene to go to the wrestling event in Highland Trailer Park at 7:30 p.m. Now, looking at several maps of the area, it seems that Lakeshore is roughly 3 miles away from the crime scene at Robin Hood Hills Woods. Highland Trailer Park is further away than Lakeshore. So, whilst the timeline could possibly work, I think realistically it would be very, very tight. Continued lying. When Jesse gets to Lakeshore for the first time, he mentions a cult leader who gave an induction to Damien and specifically guided him in what to do. Jesse conveniently cannot recall the cult leader's name, nor can he describe the man's features, other than stating that he is a male and resembles Damien, though with a beard.
Jesse Miskelly. There's another guy, it was a guy, by Lakeshore. Dan Stidham. An old guy, a young guy. Was he a kid? Miskelly. No, he ain't no kid, he's a guy. Stidham. You don't know this other guy's name? Miskelly. I'll think of it in a minute. I just can't think of it right now.
Jesse also claimed that he lied in the incident report as well, since the cult never actually killed a dog. Without trying to sound cynical or negative in any way, it's pretty difficult to keep up with Jesse's change in lies from one month to the other throughout 1993-94. What do you guys think? Inaccurate facts about the crime. Now, Jesse continues to say that the boys were choked until he is corrected by his attorney. After being corrected, Jesse then implied that Damien held the boys in a chokehold or headlock instead of actually choking them. Transcript.
Jesse Miskelly. Damien choked. I don't remember which one. Dan Stidham. Now you know you heard during the trial that the medical examiner said none of the boys were choked? Miskelly. He didn't choke him. Not choked. Just say just hold their head and choked. Not hard enough. Just holding him. Stidham. How deep was the water that the boys got thrown into? Miskelly. I'm gonna say deep. Real deep. Stidham. Okay, Jesse. I'm gonna show you a diagram of the crime scene that was drawn by one of the officers. Get your green marker again for me and see if you recognize any of this stuff. Okay? Can you tell that's the Blue Beacon truck wash? Miskelly. That don't look right. This don't look right.
Jesse claims here that the boys were drowned in, quote, deep water, as opposed to the 2 feet of water that was testified in trial by Jesse. Further, Jesse is absolutely mystified when he is shown the police sketch of the crime scene. He reacts like it's somewhere new to him. I maintain my impartiality here, even though it may sound like I am questioning, but Jesse's story changes a lot. For context, both prosecution and defense had the same questions, skepticism, and misgivings at the time of trial. Let's look at the other side. Jesse does clear up some lies and inconsistencies on record, and tones down most of the cult activity narrative. He admits that they did not kill dogs, and mostly sat around listening to Damien while lighting candles. He says that he made up many of the cult details, such as what he told Dr. Offshee. Transcript.
Dan Stidham. What about the dog's legs and stuff? Jesse Miss Kelly. No. Stidham. Why did you tell the police that? Miss Kelly. I just made that up.
So Jesse cleans up his earlier statements by reiterating that he lied about key details such as the rope, mostly to throw police off, and much like he said in the February 1994 incident report. Him smashing the whiskey bottle near the overpass was later corroborated by his lawyers. I'll go into a bit more detail about that shortly. Finally, even with all the problems I've discussed, this is by far the most plausible version of events that Jesse offers. And if he was telling something close to the truth in any of his confessions, this one and the next were probably it. If Jesse did participate in the murders, some of the discrepancies discussed could probably be explained by the passage of time and memory issues, which Jesse notably had. Side note, Jesse's defense attorney persuaded him not to testify even after this confession. Confession to the prosecution. Same as before, folks, follow the link below to the transcript of a conversation that we're going to discuss. It's a confession that Jesse made to the prosecution. Little of what I'm about to discuss will make sense unless you take a look at the transcript, just FYI. If you head to www.callahan.mysite.com/WM3/Feb17.html. This conversation was against the objections of Jesse's attorney. Jesse was told several times specifically not to make this confession, but he would insist on doing so anyway. It's mainly a shorter, more concise version of what he had told his lawyer. References to a cult are cut out, and the time that Jesse arrives back to Highland to go to the wrestling event is pushed back a little later, making the timeline slightly more plausible. He also admits to even more involvement than his February 8th confession by stating that he handed his shoelaces to Damien and Jason to tie the boys up. The shoelaces that the boys were tied up with for the most part were their own, with the exception of one single lace. More to come about that later though. I will add here that Jesse never, in all of his confessions and interviews, ever repeated the same story twice. They always differ in some way to the previous confession. That's just a simple factual observation. Now, some problems with his confession. Jesse says he went to work and got off at dinner time, despite his employer testifying at trial that Jesse left at 1:30 p.m, so just after lunch. Jesse himself stated on February 8th that this was not true and that he got off work around noon. He admits that there are parts of that night that are difficult to remember for him. Completely understandable given how, by this point, almost a year has passed. Although the flip side of that argument is that whilst a year has passed, he has also been repeating this story over and over and over and focusing on little else during that period of time. So potato potato. Jesse says once and for all that Damien and Jason did not rape the boys but did mess around, his words, with the boys' genitals. This would fall in line much closer with what the medical examiner testified to at trial. In his February 8th confession, Jesse said that Damien put his penis in the boys, but did not rape them. How exactly this could have occurred or what Jesse actually meant is unclear, however. He mentions being very drunk, which could affect his recollection of that night, and it could also explain why he would have thrown up at the crime scene. Transcript.
Brent Davis. Okay, we have turned one of the tapes over, at least one of the tapes over. Jesse, you said that you got sick going home that night. You mean sick at your stomach? Jesse Miss Kelly. Yes. Davis. Throwing up? Miss Kelly. Drunk until I got sick.
Going against his defense lawyer's wishes, Dan Stidham very clearly told him several times that he didn't want Jesse to give testimony to the prosecutors and that it would hurt Jesse's appeal process. Jesse refused, however, and said that he was aware of Stidham's objections and later alleged that Stidham was being, quote, mean to him. The aftermath. Jesse did have some contact with the prosecution at the time that he gave his final statement, the extent of which has been debated, however. And he may have had people over at his jail talking about his testimony at the upcoming Eccles and Baldwin trial. Before Jesse even gave his statement on February the 17th, an officer allegedly told the prosecution that Jesse wanted to testify, which suggests that the jailers and Jesse were talking about it prior to the defense attorney's arrival. Jesse's own lawyer, Dan Stidham, was notably furious when talking about the February confession. He claimed that the prosecution had, quote, kidnapped Jesse by transferring him to another prison closer to the Eccles-Baldwin trial and also poisoned Jesse's mind against his own attorneys by promising that he could see his girlfriend amongst other benefits. There is no solid proof of this besides Stidham's word for it, however. The prosecution admitted that they had talked to Jesse soon after his conviction, but had always told him that his defense lawyers didn't want him to testify and had to be careful about his rights. Additionally, the prosecution also claimed that the other defense lawyer for Jesse, Greg Crow, had given them the go-ahead to obtain Jesse's testimony on the 17th. Crow said in the hearing that he told the prosecutors that he had no problem with it, but he also shared that Stidham would, so therefore he advised the prosecutions to wait. He told them on the telephone before this statement was taken not to talk to Jesse until the two defense lawyers could be present, which, to be fair for the prosecution, they did comply with. The judge supposed the prosecution, claiming it was their right to obtain Jesse's testimony by any means necessary, and that they had been more than generous with the defense attorneys who did not, by law, have to be there. Legalities, sure, but dirty practices nonetheless. Jesse ultimately refused to testify against Damien and Jason after consulting with an independent lawyer. His confessions were not supposed to be considered as evidence in their trial at all. In Jesse Miskelly's Rule 37 hearing, his lawyer claimed that he had recorded another conversation with Jesse in March, where Jesse once again professed his innocence and shared that, quote, people were telling him he could get out of prison if he testified against Jason and Damien. That transcript is not available at Callahan, strangely, and has never been released publicly, so we can only take the lawyer's word for it, I'm afraid. Here's some of my thoughts and analysis. So these are just some possible scenarios here. Number 1, Jesse is telling the truth to the best of his ability, something that may have been impeded by alcohol and time. 2, Jesse is telling the truth mostly, though he gets some information wrong due to factors like alcohol, telling the police what they wanted to hear, and trying to minimize his role in the murders. 3, Jesse may have witnessed or been tangentially connected to the murders, but did not take part in hurting the boys directly. 4, Jesse was involved with Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin, but lied in his initial confessions about key details because he wanted the police off his back and didn't want to say more than he wanted to in order to minimize his involvement. He later attempted to tell something close to the truth after he is convicted, though he gets some details wrong due to time past and unclear memories. 5. Jesse was actually involved with Damien and Jason, but is lying in all of his confessions about the key details. 6. Jesse was involved with other perpetrators who have never been apprehended. 7. And finally, Jesse was not involved in these crimes whatsoever. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Obviously, I have my own thoughts and opinions, but I'm going to leave those out of this episode. I might share my personal thoughts over on Instagram once the series ends for those of you who wish to hear my personal opinion. Anyway, let's move on to the next section. The alibis. You may have noticed already, though it will become more commonplace in the next section of this episode, that I refer to a lot of witnesses and those involved in the trial by their first name and the first initial of their second name. This was the way that their names were logged in official trial documents to protect their anonymity, so I will continue that here. Number 1. Jesse Miskelly's alibi. So, Jesse's recollection of what he did on May 4th and 5th, 1993 would be the most extensive of any of the defendants at trial. It made up a good portion of the defence's strategy, in fact. It was established that on May 4th, Jesse spent the night at a friend's trailer, which did not have a telephone. This would invalidate part of Jesse's confessions, it's worth noting, because Jason Baldwin supposedly made a call to Jesse the night before the crime took place about going to West Memphis the following day. But this alibi from Jesse now rendered that claim impossible. Admittedly, this witness did not tell the police that Jesse spent the night in his initial statement though. Jesse's initial recount on May the 5th, as presented to the West Memphis police and his defense lawyer, was that he was working until dinner time at a roofing company. His employer actually testified, both in a statement given to the police and at trial, that he dropped Jesse off at Jesse's home in Highland Trailer Park at midday. Jesse had two parts to his alibi during trial. The first was that he was observed during a police officer visit at 6:30 p.m. in Highland Trailer Park, and that he then went to a wrestling event at around 7:30 p.m. in Dyess, Arkansas. Jesse's girlfriend, Susie Brewer, claimed to have been with Jesse from the time he finished babysitting his neighbor Stephanie Dollar's children at around 4 p.m. to when he left to go to the wrestling event at around 7 p.m. She said that he was only ever out of my sight on that day for, quote, 15 or 20 minutes at a time. She testified that Jesse hung out with her on the street and stayed at Stephanie Dollar's trailer for most of the evening. However, a different witness claimed during the trial that she had seen Jesse on his front porch without his girlfriend sometime between 4 and 6 p.m. Yet another witness backed up the porch story, claiming that she had sat with Jesse on his front porch for most of the time between 5:30 and 7 p.m. Both witnesses claimed that they hadn't seen Jesse's girlfriend there at all. The second witness never told the police this in her initial statement, and the reason she raised it during the trial was because, quote, they kept changing the subject to ask me about a cult, unquote. Multiple witnesses, including Stephanie Dollar, testified that Jesse had been sporadically present when the police responded to two disturbance calls at 6:30 p.m. when Dollar reported that her child had been slapped by another woman, and then again at around 6:45 p.m. when the two families got into a physical altercation over the issue. The officer responding to the scene at 6:30 and the following two officers who came at 6:45 all claimed that they hadn't seen Jesse Miskelly there. A different witness said in police statements that she did not see Jesse at the scene either. In fact, in Jesse's later confession to the police after being convicted, Jesse said that Officer Callahan lied. There was actually no Officer Callahan that testified at the trial, however. Jesse's defense lawyer told investigator Bob Ruff recently that one of the police officers perjured himself on the stand and actually lied about not seeing Jesse. These are the defense lawyer's allegations, to be clear, and not mine. Where Jesse was in relation to the police car during this incident also varied from witness to witness. Two witnesses saw Jesse talking to a police officer at around 6:30 p.m. down the street, while another saw Jesse talking at around the same time but in front of Stephanie's trailer. The police officers testified that they did not go to Stephanie's actual trailer. One of these witnesses, named as Dennis C., also stated that he never told the West Memphis police that he had seen Jesse around this time, despite giving a statement previously that he did not. Jesse's father said that he saw Jesse at around 7:15 p.m. before Jesse left to go to the wrestling event, and right after the police cars had left the scene of the disturbance. He said at the trial that he remembered this specifically because his DWI class got out early. That's driving while intoxicated for those unaware of this abbreviation. The DWI class instructor, however, was brought to the stand by the prosecution during trial, and she testified that she let the class out at 7:45 p.m, a time when Jesse's father could not have seen the police cars at the scene while arriving home. In an initial interview right after his arrest, Jesse's father also said that Jesse could have been with Damien and Jason that night, though he affirmed that his son did not commit the murders. The wrestling alibi became even more contradictory. The crucial witness for Jesse's presence, Fred Ravel, originally told police that he knew Jesse had been with him on May 5th because that was the day he made a payment for the wrestling ring and signed a liability contract. But later, receipts would show that the payment was made on April the 28th, the Wednesday before the crimes took place. During trial, Fred then said that he remembered Jesse was with him that night because a regular attender was not there and their brother had attended instead. He went on to say that the owner of the wrestling ring communicated with him that the payment and contract happened on May 5th, which is why he related it to the police at the time. But he was obviously mistaken. The contract was signed by all the wrestlers performing at the event at different times also. At trial, Fred Ravel claimed that the only two people who signed for it on the day of payment were him and another wrestler that did not testify. One witness, named as Roger J., claimed to have signed the contract on May 5th, while another claimed to have signed it before that. The prosecution called in a witness that was the final name on their list that claimed that he signed for it prior to May the 5th also. However, Roger J. also said that he signed the document multiple times because he had to sign his name each and every time that he went wrestling. This suggests that there may have been more than one copy of the contract that people signed, depending on the day that they went. So if there was more than one contract, then they certainly were not submitted into evidence. In total, 5 separate people all testified that Jesse went to a wrestling event that night. One of the most significant was the person who was new to wrestling and who only went to the wrestling that one time. He said that he wasn't sure that it was May the 5th, but he thought it might actually be because his brother, a regular attender of the wrestling, was at a search and rescue meeting at that time. Though that was not necessarily unusual, since his brother attended search and rescue meetings on the first Wednesday and third Wednesday of each month, this would mean it was not possible for him to have attended the wrestling event when the payment was made on April 28th, since that was the last Wednesday of the month. So his brother must have attended instead. The speculation is the witnesses, not mine, however. For transparency, Roger J. had trouble with the dates when he went to the wrestling. He first said that he only went wrestling once, and then amended that claim to 3 times. He also could not remember the dates of the other 2 times that he said he attended, but he was clear that he had gone on May the 5th. His memory, for this instance, was a lot stronger than the other 2 times it seems, but for no particular reason. Dennis, another witness, in addition to saying that he was with Jesse at 6:30 p.m. during the commotion in Highland Trailer Park, also claimed that he went to the wrestling event with Jesse at 7:30 p.m. that night. In the police statement, not only did he mention that particular tidbit, he also said that he had only gone wrestling after the murders, but never with Jesse. Dennis said he was mistaken at the time that he originally spoke to the West Memphis police. There is evidence that there hadn't even been a wrestling event in Dias for more than a year at this point in time, as stated by the town's mayor. However, it should be pointed out that all the wrestlers alleged that this was actually a practice session, not an official match. 2 different witnesses interviewed by the West Memphis police but not called to the stand during trial also cast some doubt on Jesse's alibi. One owned a store near to where the wrestling event took place, and he claimed that he had not seen Jesse that night. A different witness claimed that on May the 5th, Fred Ravel and a Dennis C. left to go to wrestling at 5:30, and Jesse did not go with them. Many of these alibi witnesses also wore a yellow ribbon during the trial, which they said was in support of Jesse, though all of them testified that they hadn't planned their testimony together or been pressured to lie in Jesse's defense. I guess they all had the idea to wear the same ribbon at the same time. As the saying goes, stranger things have happened at sea. Damien Eccles' alibi. To put it bluntly, yet as neutrally as I can, there are several ways to interpret Damien's alibi. So we're going to back up through the day, and I'm going to present several versions of Damien's day on May the 5th. Generally, it's agreed that Damien went to a doctor's appointment sometime around midday. This is documented and evidenced. His family then dropped off a prescription with a pharmacy, which was corroborated by a receipt from the pharmacist. What happened next is foggy to say the least and a little unclear. Most of the witnesses who contribute to Damien's alibi claim that at some point in the afternoon, Damien and Jason were together. Damien's mother Pam Hutchison and his sister Michelle Eccles said that at 1 p.m. Damien was dropped off at Lakeshore Trailer Park where he visited his girlfriend Dominique Tier. Dominique's mother corroborated this. Damien and Jason's friend Ken Watkins claimed that Damien showed up at Dominique's house at 3:30 p.m. This was backed up by a friend of his named Holly G, and also by Jennifer Bearden, who claimed that they were talking to Damien at his house until roughly 3 to 4 p.m. Jennifer Bearden also said that Damien told her that he was headed to Jason's house at that time when he spoke with her. Damien called her later at some time between 4 to 5 p.m. from Jason's house, before saying that they were heading out to Jason's uncle's house. Dominique's mother, and Damien's family all claimed that Damien and Dominique were picked up at the laundromat sometime after visiting with Jason at his uncle's house. The times switched around a lot, however. Jason Baldwin said on May 9th that Dominique and Damien were picked up at 6 p.m. Dominique initially said that it was after dark, so around 7:30 p.m. at least. She later said it was actually around 5:30 p.m. and her mother claimed that Dominique came home sometime between 5:30 to 6. Damien's parents claimed that they were picked up at around 4 p.m. At trial, all witnesses testified to the time being 4 p.m., evolving their stories slightly. Why Damien and Dominique were picked up at the laundromat is quite confusing. It is worth noting that Jason's uncle said that he only saw Jason in his house that afternoon, not Dominique or Damien. This was despite Damien being welcome in his home, and Damien, Dominique and Jason testifying that they all hung out at the house before Damien and Dominique left. Jason's uncle said that the three of them had actually come to his house another day after May 5th, when Jason mowed the lawn. So Jason's own uncle effectively weakened his nephew and his friend's alibi at trial. Why Damien and Dominique would not just be picked up at his uncle's house instead of walking to the laundromat is one of the unanswered questions of his alibi and case. Who picked Dominique and Damien up from the laundromat? This also changes several times. Damien initially said it was his father, and then later said that it was his mother. Damien's sister said that her, with both of her parents, went to get Damien and Dominique. This was supported by Damien's parents. Dominique initially said that Damien's mother picked them up, before changing it to the whole family later on. It's entirely possible that all of this is just semantics, of course, or turn of phrase. After this is where a point of real contention raises its head. Damien's family claimed that sometime around 7 p.m, Damien went to the Sanders house with them. Now, the Sanders were a family that were extremely close family friends of the Eccles family, and in fact the Eccles had lived in their home for a time. Both families viewed the other as an extension of their own family. The Sanders parents were out at the Splash Casino that night, and Damien's family only encountered the youngest daughter, Jennifer. The Eccles stayed for a short period of time before writing a note and leaving and heading back to their home. Stacey Sanders and her cousin Meredith, who was not called to testify at trial, were watching TV across the street in another home. They gave a statement to police to say that they had seen the whole family there at the Sanders house. This was, however, vigorously attacked by the prosecution. First, the time switched around before it settled on at around 7 p.m. at the trial. Damien told the police on May 10th that he had gone to the Sanders house from 3 to 5 p.m. and later was not able to remember the time at all while on the stand. I think it is worth noting, though, that Damien did have memory problems given the medication that he took for his mental illness, and I think we can accept this claim. For reference, or research, if you look up the medication imipramine, that was what Damien was prescribed and taken for his depression. Damien's mother, in her 2 statements to the West Memphis police, claimed the time was 6 to 6:30, while Damien's father would not give an exact time. Another point of contention was the day that Damien's parents split up, since it would be odd for the whole family to be together in the days after that event. Pam told the police on May 12th that they had split up on May 4th, before changing it later to May 9th. Damien's father just said that it happened in mid-May. When asked about this by the prosecution, Pam said that her memory was refreshed by seeing her husband's wedding cake and realizing that they had split up the day of his birthday. That's his subsequent wedding cake following his marriage to Pam, FYI. Whether this actually happened was never corroborated. The defense called an independent witness that testified to seeing the Sanders family on the 5th of May at the casino. But in a statement given to the police, the man who was supposed to have taken them to the casino, Donald DeWitt, seemed confused about the actual date. On May 5th, there was a record of 4 people dining on the DeWitt membership card, but only a record of 1 guest in the casino. There was a 2 next to his name, with a slash and then a 1 written, clear as mud. The Sanders claimed that this was their first time visiting the casino, but admitted it was not their only time having visited since. Jennifer and Stacey claimed that they knew it was a Wednesday because Beverly Hills 90210 was on television that day at 7 p.m. and they never missed an episode. A TV schedule from May 5th, 1993 shows that it was playing that day at that time, like they stated. Stacey, in her initial witness statement, however, said that Damien's family had visited 2 days before he was arrested. This was despite claiming that she knew the visit was on the same day of the murders. Jennifer said that she knew it was May 5th because her boyfriend was a member of a band and they were playing a concert the next day. The band director stated that the concert was actually on May 17th, a Monday, however. If the day Jennifer was remembering happened to be a Sunday, then they could not have been watching Beverly Hills 90210. The West Memphis Police Department were also unable to uncover records of the Sanders visiting the Splash Casino on any other Wednesdays. The note that Damien's family wrote for the Sanders was never reproduced and was allegedly thrown away. It's also worth noting that Susan Sanders told the police before Damien's arrest that Pam called on her to remind her that the family had been there that day. Pam also told Damien on May 10th not to tell the police anything because they all had alibis. The third part of Damien's alibi was his call to numerous girls. It would be presented as a smoking gun in the documentary West of Memphis. Jennifer Bearden and Holly George talked to Damien at about 3 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Only Jennifer would make contact again at 9:20 p.m. Jason's girlfriend, Heather Cleet, talked to Damien at 10:30 p.m. and said that Damien told her that he was out walking and trying to get Jennifer's attention. Finally, Dominique talked to Damien at 10 p.m. They would apparently have a heated argument that night regarding him talking to other girls. Jason Baldwin's alibi. Of the 3 accused, Jason's alibi is by far the hardest to clarify. His lawyers would not even attempt to secure one for him at trial. In his Rule 37 hearing, Jason claimed that on May 5th, Damien and Dominique came over. They all went to his uncle's house to mow the lawn, and then Jason then went, with Ken Watkins, to go play video games at Walmart. After this, Jason returned home, purchasing a videotape from a neighbor to watch that night. He also talked on the telephone to various people such as his girlfriend Heather and friends Holly, Damien and Jennifer. Let's take a look at this alibi a little closer though. We can be fairly sure that Jason did go to school that day. There are records to prove this easily enough. Jason was let out sometime in the vicinity of 3 p.m. and went home within the hour. Witness statements are pretty consistent in placing Jason and Damien together at this time. Dominique Tier claimed that they went over to Jason's house once he came back from school, and Jennifer Bearden claimed that she called Damien at Jason's house sometime between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m, and Damien stated that he spent some of the day with Jason Baldwin. Jason's uncle claimed that Jason mowed his lawn that day from 4:30 to 6:30, also saying that he did not see Dominique or Damien. As I mentioned previously, this directly contradicts Dominique, Jason and Damien's account. Then we start getting to the Walmart part of the alibi, and oh boy. Jason's brother claimed to have been at Walmart from 5 to 6 p.m. and did not see Jason there at all. Dennis Dent, the boyfriend of Jason Baldwin's mother, went to the store for 15 minutes and saw Jason's brother, but not Jason. This was sometime around 5 p.m. Ken Watkins' portrayal of events was, I think it's fair to say, somewhat incoherent. In his first interview in September of 1993, he not only claimed that Jason did not mow his uncle's lawn, but also said that Damien came with him and Jason to Walmart. He went on to say that he left the group to go home at 5:30 p.m, while Damien and Jason headed back to Jason's house, and then went on to Dominique's at 7 p.m. He also said in the same statement that Damien and Dominique came to Walmart and that Damien, Jason and Dominique were at Jason's house at 7 p.m, where Ken would stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ken Watkins completely failed his polygraph test after giving his testimony and gave another statement where he claimed that after he left Walmart at 5:30, Damien, Jason and Dominique had talked about going to the bowling alley. He went over to Jason's house at 6:45 p.m. and stayed there for 2 hours. Jason was apparently now not there. A different boy named Don N gave a December interview and claimed to have seen Jason at Walmart at roughly 4:30. He later saw Dominique, Damien and Jason standing in front of the Walmart store at around 6 p.m, walking towards the Belvedere apartments. One day later, he returned and told the West Memphis police that he was wrong and in fact he had seen them there 2 weeks earlier. After the Walmart saga, it's incredibly unclear about what time Jason actually got home. Neither of his biological parents were home, while Dennis Dent first claimed that Jason came home at 8:30 and then amended it to 9, then 9:30, after detectives reminded him that Jason's mother had given him a call around that time and he did not know where Jason was. It's worth noting, no phone records were ever obtained, and it is not known when this call actually took place. Jason's mother claimed that she knew Jason was home at 8:30 in her first statement, and then said in a later statement that Jason told her he had gotten home at 8 p.m, before she changed the time to 9 p.m and then 8:30 p.m. during different interviews. Dent mentioned that Ken Watkins came looking for Jason sometime around 6:30 to 7 p.m. Jason's brother said that Jason came home at 7:30 with Ken Watkins and that Ken left at 9 p.m. By the way, are you as confused as me yet? So yet another West Memphis youth by the name of Garrett S. ping-ponged back and forth about seeing Jason that day. On May 16th, he told the police that he had seen Jason at 7 p.m. On May 19th, he claimed not to have seen Jason for 3 weeks. On June 7th, incorrectly logged on Callahan as June 10th by the way, Garrett said again that he was at Jason's house at 7:30 p.m, and on June the 11th he said that he went over to Jason's at 6:45 p.m. before changing his mind yet again and saying he went at 7 and left at 8:45 or maybe 9 before spending the night at his friend Kevin's house. Kevin said that Garrett had not spent the night at his house on May 5th, as he had claimed, and on June 15th, Garrett claimed that he had not actually been at Jason's or Kevin's house on May 5th after all. A neighbour, whose name is Alan P., said that Jason supposedly purchased a videotape from him. He was never interviewed by police, and he never gave a statement about that night. A friend that supposedly came with Garrett to Jason's that night was not interviewed by police either. Later that evening, Jason may have made a phone call to Heather. She initially told the police she talked to only Damien that night, before amending that in a 2008 affidavit where she claimed that she did in fact talk to Jason around 12 or 1:30 a.m. That's 15 years after the crimes when she said this for the first time, FYI. In a September 1993 statement given to the West Memphis police, Holly claimed that she tried to call Jason sometime after 3:30, but he never picked up the phone. In her 2008 affidavit, she claimed that she did talk to Jason that day and that she had minimized her friendship with him and Damien to the police, though she didn't state why. Jennifer Bearden never spoke of talking to Jason that day besides her call to his house sometime between 4 and 5 p.m. No doubt you are questioning if just about everyone involved in this case is a liar or has the worst memory. It sure seems that way, although changing stories and witness testimonies is not that uncommon in criminal cases just like this one, even surprisingly so. Now, let's dig a little more into some more confessions. The amount of people who claim that Damien, Jason or Jesse confessed to them is quite staggering in this case, though often uncorroborated. I haven't included every single one here, but I have chosen the ones most crucial to the investigation. Now, this isn't a definitive list, so please don't message me if your favourite smoking gun isn't listed here. Michael Carson. So, Michael Carson was one of the key pieces of evidence used against Jason Baldwin at trial. You saw some of his trial evidence during the Paradise Lost documentary. It was pretty graphic and detailed. He stayed in the same prison facility as Jason for a week and claimed that Jason had confessed to sucking the blood out of the victim's penis. Jason allegedly confessed this after playing a card game with Carson, amongst other details that were left out at the trial. The prosecution used this, along with a single fibre, as supposed major proof that Jason had been involved in the crimes. The saga of Michael Carson proved to be a trying one for the court lawyers. The defense were not allowed to question Carson about his extensive drug use due to it violating doctor-patient privileges. They were allowed to bring up prior convictions that came close enough to the confession date, although this was only because he was in jail when Jason supposedly confessed to him, a stranger. They pounced on Carson, admitting that Jason confessed to him 4 days after meeting him. Carson's inconsistencies from his statement, however, were where he claimed that Jason confessed to him on a different day from the card game, but while in court, he claimed that the card game and the confession happened on the same day. The thorny part came when Carson's doctor stepped forward and claimed that some of Carson's knowledge of the crime may have actually come from him and not Jason Baldwin. The judge ruled that the man could be questioned only if Carson said on the stand that he had received information from him. Carson naturally said no. The doctor would later say in a sworn affidavit that he was confused as to why he never took the stand and why one of the prosecutors, a, quote, pleasant man, became so angry when he shared this piece of information. You be the judge on why that is. Jason Baldwin's lawyer would claim in a Rule 37 hearing in 2009 that he thought the witness would be more harm than good, since he told the lawyer that he would not answer all the questions in a helpful way if it threatened to hurt his reputation. A long line of affidavits and statements came after the trial, all claiming that Carson never took part in the card game and that Jason was a soft-spoken individual and did not seem inclined to share with others anything about the crime, and that Carson was lying about certain details. Finally, Carson himself would admit in the documentary West of Memphis that he was strung out on drugs at the time that he made the allegations against Baldwin, but he refused to recant his testimony, nor did he claim that he did not hear Jason confess to him. He did apologize to Jason for testifying, however, though he did not give a clear reason why. Interestingly, if you believe in such rubbish, Michael Carson passed a polygraph test. The Softball Girls. Now, the Softball Girls refer to a group of young women who all claim to have heard Damien bragging about the murders at a softball game to a group of people. Most of the girls, who gave witness statements, claim to have heard it from someone else. They also frequently changed the date. Sometimes it happened on May 24th, sometimes it was on June 1st, and sometimes it was on May 21st. Though the director of the softball field would later claim that Eccles was there on 3 separate occasions. It seems rather doubtful to me that Damien was going around bragging each time at the softball game to me, though. What do you think? The witnesses that did claim to have directly heard Damien were named as Katie L., Jessica M., Jackie M., Jody M., and Christy V. Only the latter two testified at the trial. Jody said that she heard Damien say the following, quote, "I killed the 3 little boys, and before I turn myself in, I'm going to kill 2 more, and I already have one of them picked out." Unquote. Christy simply claimed that she had heard Damien say that he had killed 3 boys, but neither of them were able to give the context to the conversation, nor were they able to name any of the group around Damien besides Jason Baldwin. Now, Damien confessing to the crimes to Jason Baldwin seems suspect to me because Jason was meant to have been his accomplice, so surely he would already know what Damien had done, right? Anyway, Katie claimed in her witness statement that she only heard the part where Damien said, quote, "Yeah, I'm going to do it to more people too," unquote. She apparently had seen Jody there, though Jody claimed at trial that she was only at the scene with her sister Jackie and Christy, but not Katie. Jessica said that she was sitting with her mother and heard Damien say it to her cousin Katie H. Katie never gave a statement, nor did she testify at trial. Jackie also said that she just heard Damien talking about killing 3 boys. Jessica M's mother Donna took the stand and claimed that her daughters told her about this when they all got into the car on the way home. Since Damien was distinctive in how he dressed, she knew immediately who they were talking about. The token goth kid. None of the witnesses came forward until after the arrest of Damien, however. This was something that the defense pressed them hard on. The witnesses all responded that they saw Damien's picture on the television. It was only then that they remembered the conversation's significance and reported it to police. Damien, for his part, said that he was indeed at the softball field, but only once. He said this in an attempt to impeach Jody's credibility, since she claimed that she had seen him there twice. The director of the girls' club took to the stand, however, and claimed that she had seen Damien there 3 times. One of those times, Damien was apparently with both Jason Baldwin and Jessie Miskelly, and the other 2 occasions just with Jason Baldwin, allegedly. She claimed to have seen Damien on the 27th, 28th, and the 3rd of June. Now, the logical question to all of this is, why did none of the actual people Damien was speaking to come forward? 2, if Damien was so careful with hiding the murder itself, why would he be bragging about it in front of a whole crowd of people? The perpetrator, if you recall, had carefully cleaned the crime scene and covered their actions thoroughly. The prosecution did not really discuss the first point, other than alleging that these people were all Damien's, quote, groupies, but they would make a brief stab at the second point. They would claim that Damien, who was on medication for bipolar disorder, was on a manic phase during this bragging session and felt invincible enough to tell the world about what he had done. The defense, for their part, did not really try to deny that Damien had said it, but only that it could have been taken out of context. After all, we know Damien enjoyed triggering people and upsetting strangers with comments and shocking things that he would say, all just to get a reaction, as teenagers occasionally tend to do. The skating rink girls. Now, this group of women have received less attention than the softball girls, since none of them were actually called to the stand at trial. Nevertheless, the stories they tell are interesting. Much the same thing happened here as what happened with the softball girls. A lot of people claiming that they had heard Damien confess because someone else told him about it. The only person who would claim to have heard Damien directly at the skating rink was 12-year-old Brandy W. She said in a June 1993 statement to police that on May 7th she heard Damien Eccles tell Jason Baldwin that he had something to do with the three boys' murders and that both Jason and Damien had giggled about it. Other witness accounts confirmed that Damien and Jason were at the skating rink that Friday, though no one else made reference to Damien saying anything about the murders. This statement, yet again, like the previous softball girl's statement, states that Damien was informing Jason about his crimes, yet Jason was meant to be Damien's accomplice in the crimes, so this again does not make sense. Why would Damien confess something to Jason, who was supposedly right there and helping him? This might explain why Brandy was not asked to give testimony at the trial. The true romance scenario. Unlike the other confessions, which were taken from witness statements at the time, the true romance scenario refers to a piece of West Memphis 3 community law. Allegedly, a former supporter of the three convicted boys, who was friendly with Jesse Miskelly's family, got in contact with Jesse and started asking him questions, and she did not like what she heard. Eventually, she came to believe that Jesse was in fact guilty, turning her support on its head. Now, who exactly this was, or what she heard, is hard to corroborate, since she never disclosed this information or her true identity. Here is a quote attributed to her that was propagated on online message boards in the early to mid-2000s. Quote,
"If I was going to let this case consume my life, I felt like I needed to research things more aggressively and ask Jesse some point-blank questions that I never had. I felt like it was the only fair thing to do. If I'm risking my peace of mind and throwing myself 110% into this, then I'm going to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person I'm putting my good name on the line for is being honest and is innocent. After all my research and questions, I found out things were much different than I originally thought. It's also different when you ask someone a point-blank question and you don't get the answer you were expecting."
Whilst I'm including this information here, as this person never identified themselves or provided detail or further evidence that what she was saying was true, we should, in all reality, take this quote with a pinch of salt. Buddy Lucas. So Buddy Lucas first got dragged into the case when Jesse Miskelly claimed in his confessions to have given him blue and white Adidas shoes after the crime. On a June 10th statement, Buddy initially claimed that Jesse had given him those shoes back in February, 3 months prior to the crimes. In a later statement given in October 1993, he said that Jesse had confessed to him and given him the shoes the day after the murder. Buddy's outline of his evening was that he went with a few friends to take barbecue chicken over to Jesse's house and stayed there until 9 p.m. The next morning, Jesse broke down crying and said that he had sacrificed the three little boys with Damien and Jason. Later that same day, Buddy then recanted their story and subsequently failed a polygraph, claiming that what he said just wasn't true. He then said that he had recanted because he was scared of Jesse and of what Jesse would do to him. He handed the West Memphis police the shoes that Jesse allegedly gave to him after the crime, something that was never brought up again at trial. Later, during Jesse's trial, Buddy refused to testify after receiving a visit from Ron Lax, who was Damien's private investigator. Buddy said that the police had yelled at him and coerced his testimony. He also allegedly had an alibi that day since he was at work. His earlier testimony about having barbecued chicken was disproven by his friend, who claimed that he had not gone to Jesse's house or Buddy's house that night. The prosecution accused Lax of poisoning Buddy's mind against them, while Buddy called him nice in a phone call to the prosecution. We'll return to Buddy Lucas, himself a suspect, in the next episode. William Winford Jones and Ken Watkins. Friends of Damien and Jason, Ken Watkins and William Jones claimed that Damien confessed to them. In a May 26 interview, Jones told Officer Ridge that Damien was a devil worshipper and had told him about raping the boys and murdering them with a little knife. He later recanted when he was confronted post-arrest by Eccles' private investigator. Ken gave an interview in September 1993 where he said that Damien had told him that he was at the crime scene and that he wanted to do something drastic because everyone was always picking on him. Okay, so time has got the better of us once again, and I'm going to end tonight's episode there. There's been a lot of information once again this evening. So we will pick up again next week, where we will talk about the relationship between Damien, Jason and Jesse. We will take a deeper dive into who Damien Eccles was, and we will look at the physical evidence in the case and other significant suspects. So until then, my friends, good night.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show tonight. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform and subscribe to our show so that you never miss an episode. Our shows aren't sponsored by any company or corporation, so any support you can give us goes a long way in supporting the work that we do. From all of us here at Dead Souls, sleep tight.